All right, let's talk about A Complete Unknown. Where do I even begin? This is a movie I've been looking forward to for a while, and after seeing it, I'm of two minds about it. I both really, really loved it. It had me smiling, tapping along to every song, marveling at the performances, and yet I found myself wrestling with a certain C word. And no, not that C word. I'm talking about cliché. James Mangold, the man behind Walk the Line, knows his way around a musical biopic. But with A Complete Unknown, he dips into some of those very same biopic cliches we've all seen before. You know the ones. People staring slack-jawed as Bob Dylan plays his songs. Iconic, sure, but it's an image we've been inundated with so often that it starts to lose its weight. But that being said, cliches aren't inherently bad. In fact, this movie reminded me why they work. There's a comfort in revisiting these beats, especially when the performances and the music elevate them, and boy, do they elevate them. In modern discourse, the word cliché has become a bit of a dirty word, synonymous with lazy storytelling or recycled ideas. But I want to push back against that notion. Clichés exist because they resonate. They tap into something fundamental and universal. They persist not because they're tired, but because they're true. Take A Complete Unknown, for example. Yes, it leans into familiar tropes, the scrappy artist defying the odds, the meteoric rise to fame, the struggles with love and identity. But instead of feeling stale, these moments act as a foundation for the film to dive deeper into what makes Bob Dylan's story so enduring. This isn't about reinventing the wheel. It's about using that wheel to take us on an emotionally rich journey. There's a tendency in modern film discourse to view comfort as a weakness, to assume that a movie must be groundbreaking, subversive, or boundary-pushing to be meaningful. This mindset undervalues the power of familiarity and emotional resonance. Not every film needs to break new ground to be impactful. Sometimes what we need is a sense of comfort, something that feels familiar. There's an undeniable power in returning to well-worn structures and tropes, especially when they're infused with intention and heart. The idea that art must always be about pushing boundaries overlooks the importance of stories that help us process and understand the human experience in ways that are accessible and emotionally rich. And here's the thing, cliches only fail when they're hollow, but when done with care, when imbued with heart and intention, they can remind us why they became archetypes in the first place. This film, much like another musical biopic that I love, Rocket Man, doesn't just rely on the formula, it uses it as a canvas to paint something that feels deeply personal and alive. And at the same time, the film is quietly subversive in how it depicts Bob Dylan. He's still mysterious, sure. There are mentions of him working in a traveling circus, though there's no proof to back it up. But for once, the film resists mythologizing him to death. Instead, it humanizes him in a way rarely seen on screen. Rather than portraying him as this ever-changing enigma or untouchable icon, we see his flaws, his hesitations, and the parts of him that are distinctly, vulnerably human. It feels like the Bob Dylan that you or I could meet. Not a god of music, but a man grappling with the weight of his own story. Real quick, let's talk about Timothee Chalamet. I would not be surprised if he takes home an Oscar for this. At the very least, a nomination just feels inevitable at this point. There's a moment very early on in the film when he's singing a song to Woody Guthrie in the hospital. And that's the moment I stopped seeing Timothee Chalamet and I started seeing Bob Dylan. And that's the highest compliment I could give an actor. He completely disappears into this role, capturing Dylan's enigmatic, prickly, and magnetic presence. And as for the singing, he nails it. I was like everyone else where I was a little bit worried when I saw the first trailer, when it was announced that he was going to be playing Bob Dylan. But you could tell that Chalamet spent years perfecting Dylan's style, learning guitar, singing, and embodying the man. One of the more polarizing aspects of the film is the love triangle between Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, played by Monica Barbaro, and Sylvie, played by Elle Fanning. While I didn't always find this subplot as gripping as the rest of the movie, there are moments of pure devastation. And I want to highlight at least one of them. The one I want to talk about is the arc surrounding the times they are a-changing. Early in the film, there's a quiet moment where Sylvie stumbles upon a scrap of paper with lyrics scribbled on it, some lyrics from the times they are a-changing. She takes a look at the words, she reads them out loud, sensing their weight, only for Bob Dylan to snatch it right out of her hands. It's as if the song is too sacred, too raw for him to share, even with someone as close as Sylvie. That tension, that mixture of intimacy and withholding, becomes a thread that runs through their entire relationship and through this entire movie. Fast forward to the Newport Folk Festival, where Bob Dylan performs the song for the first time in front of a rapturous crowd. It's a monumental moment, both for Bob Dylan's career and for the cultural zeitgeist, and the film captures it with real reverence. But the scene's emotional core isn't just in Dylan's delivery, it's in Sylvie's reaction. As the camera cuts to her in the audience, tears are streaming down her face. The full weight of their shared history comes crashing down. Here is Bob Dylan, sharing with the world a song so powerful, so transformative, that it becomes an anthem for an entire generation. And yet, it's a song that he couldn't bear to share with her. The contrast is just devastating. For Sylvie, it's a moment of profound heartbreak, and Elle Fanning does an incredible job of emoting this. It's a realization that the man she loves belongs more to his music and by extension to the world than he ever could to her. And on a personal level, I have loved this song my entire life. It's a masterpiece of empathy, urgency, and timelessness. But to see it reframed this way as both a gift and a wound was devastatingly beautiful. Moments like these are where the film truly shines, capturing Bob Dylan's duality, the deeply personal artist who poured his soul into his music, and the enigmatic figure who kept even those closest to him at arm's length. It's a haunting reminder that great art often comes at a personal cost, both for the artist and for those who love them. The Bob, Sylvie, Joan Baez love triangle is essentially also a parallel to the folk music versus rock music love triangle that Bob is entangled within, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more in the next section. At the heart of this film lies a fascinating philosophical friction between Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, a conflict that mirrors the broader tension between folk music and rock music in the mid-1960s. Pete Seeger, played with remarkable nuance by Edward Norton, stands as a symbol of the folk movement's moral and civic purpose. For Pete Seeger, music is a tool for social change, a megaphone for the voiceless, and a vessel for justice. When Bob Dylan emerges on the scene with his sharp lyrics and haunting empathy for the struggles of the disenfranchised, Pete Seeger sees him as the chosen torchbearer for folk music. And for a time, Bob Dylan fulfills this role. But Dylan's relationship with Seeger and with folk music at large is complicated by the fact that Dylan never sees himself as part of a movement. In the film, this subtle distinction grows into a chasm. As Bob Dylan's artistic ambitions shift and his creative flame pulls him towards rock and roll, Pete Seeger becomes a tragic figure left grappling with what he sees as betrayal, not just of him, but of the entire folk movement itself. And the film captures this tension most poignantly in the moments leading up to Dylan's electrifying performance at the Newport Folk Festival. Dylan's decision to plug in his electric guitar signals his desire to explore other facets of his creativity, even at the cost of alienating his mentor. The philosophical divide is stark. Pete Seeger sees music as a collective endeavor for the greater good, while Bob Dylan, unapologetically individualistic, seeks to explore the depths of his own artistic identity, trusting that his journey will resonate with others in ways they may not yet understand. By 1965, Pete Seeger's influence wanes a little bit, and he recedes to the margins of the cultural conversation, even as Dylan continues to rise. This tension between the old guard and the new, between community and individuality, is as much a conversation about art as it is about identity and the inevitable collisions of generational change. This type of story, the old guard versus the new school, resonates because we've all been on both sides of the divide. We have all been the ones clinging to the old ways, and we get hurt when something we cherish changes too quickly. And we've all been the disruptors, yearning to be understood, even as we challenge what others have held sacred. These types of stories teach us empathy for both positions and remind us that progress and tradition are not enemies, but they're dance partners in the waltz of history. Every iteration that I've seen of this story offers a fresh perspective on the same age-old lesson, which is that growth is inevitable, and with it comes both loss and renewal. By engaging with these narratives, we grapple with the questions that they pose, like how do we balance respect for what came before with the courage to break free from it? And these are questions worth asking. no matter how many times the story is told. This film is about 60% music, 40% story, and honestly, that's the right ratio. The music is the soul of the film. Moments like Bob Dylan's performance at the Newport Folk Festival feel electric. Just to go back to it, when he sang "The Times They Are A-Changing," I got chills. I got choked up in the theater because I love that song. And it's in moments like that that the movie captures something profound. The world's reaction to Bob Dylan's genius, watching people witness something entirely new and transgressive and transformative. I'd be staring too, just like those wide-eyed characters. And that scene in particular reminded me why Bob Dylan's music is timeless. It speaks across generations, even if Bob Dylan himself would hate being called the voice of a generation. Some critics have potentially rightly questioned why this film focuses on the period from 1961 to 65, the lead up to Dylan going electric. They argue that it's one of the least interesting parts of his life, but for me, it leaves the door open. Dylan's story is still a mystery, one that can never be fully unraveled, and this movie keeps that mystery alive. And Timothee Chalamet, what a risk this could have been. But frankly, he knocked it out of the park, alongside an incredible supporting cast: Edward Norton as Pete Seeger, Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez, Elle Fanning as Sylvie, and Boyd Holbrook, my man Boyd Holbrook, as Johnny Cash. It's a knockout ensemble in a film that's as much about the music as it is about the man. At the end of the day, this is a movie that asks one simple question. To quote Bob Dylan, how does it feel? And for me, it felt joyous. It felt like a celebration, not just of Bob Dylan, but of the universal human truths that his music and life embody. And honestly, I felt like I didn't want it to end. Every time a scene would happen, there would be a cut, and I would be so worried that the movie was going to cut to black. And every time it didn't, I found myself rejoicing inside. That's not something I could say about every movie that I see. So frankly, I love this. So that's A Complete Unknown. It's not perfect. It dips into familiar territory, sure. But it's a movie I'll revisit again and again, just like I do with Walk the Line, just like I do with Rocketman. These are movies that people seem to love to hate for some reason, but I'm gonna go back to that feeling of comfort and familiarity. And I'm not gonna put down comfort and familiarity. I don't think that we should. If you're a Bob Dylan fan, this movie is a must-see. If you're not, it might just turn you into one. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be making Bob Dylan my entire personality for the next few weeks. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Did the movie blow your mind, or did you feel like saying, it ain't me, babe? Thank you for watching. Go to the movies. I'll see you next time.